The glow of the Empire's weapon lit up the night like a second sun. It was impossible to look at directly, yet every human eye turned toward it. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the hammer to fall, but instead of fear crushing them, something else filled the air, a steady pulse of unity. In neighborhoods, bunkers, and command centers, people looked at one another and knew this was the test of their existence. They were no longer just scattered nations. They were Earth itself, standing on the edge of destruction but unwilling to bend. In the silence before the strike, memories began to surface in human hearts. They remembered wars fought on their own soil, not with starships or energy cannons, but with grit, fire, and survival. They remembered moments in history when empires had believed humanity was weak, when armies had marched against them thinking the outcome was already decided. Every time, the cost had been high, but every time, humanity had endured. The galaxy did not know those stories, but the people of Earth carried them in their bones. And that memory now hardened their resolve. Deep beneath the ground, in facilities the Empire's scans could not detect, engineers worked frantically over humming machines. Sparks flew as they adjusted circuits, rerouted power, and fed ancient theories into reality. These were not polished weapons built in shining factories. They were rough, improvised, and untested. Yet in their own way, they were far more dangerous than anything the Empire had prepared for. For unlike the invaders, humanity had never been able to rely on overwhelming strength. They had learned to fight with creativity, with the ability to adapt in ways no enemy could predict. Above ground, soldiers were not the only ones preparing. Farmers abandoned their fields to deliver fuel and supplies. Dock workers carried crates of strange equipment whose true function they did not understand but trusted completely. Scientists who had once been rivals now sat side by side, sketching. Hurried designs on scraps of paper, their arguments drowned out by the roar of urgency. Every person had become part of the defense, whether they realized it or not. The Empire saw only a planet. What they had truly encountered was a hive of willpower that no warship could erase. Inside the Empire's flagship, the mood was shifting. The commanders barked orders, demanding explanations from their crews. Why had the first warship gone dark? Why were their sensors struggling to pierce the atmosphere? Why did their communications feel delayed, distorted? No one had answers. They had assumed Earth's defenses were non-existent, yet now they faced a force they could not classify. Pride kept them from admitting it, but deep inside, they began to sense danger. The plan had been simple: crush resistance in seconds, send a message to the galaxy that Earth was nothing. But instead of surrender, they had met defiance, and defiance was spreading faster than they could contain it. In the streets of Earth's cities, the fear remained, but it was mixed with something new. Children peeked from windows and whispered questions their parents could not answer. Groups of neighbors gathered, listening to radio updates, their hands shaking but their eyes steady. They had never seen alien warships before, yet they were beginning to realize that the enemy above was not invincible. One ship had already fallen silent. Others flickered at the edges of their formation, as though something unseen was tearing at them. Hope was fragile, but it was there. And once hope takes root, it does not die easily. The leaders of Earth, gathered in hidden chambers across continents, spoke in urgent tones. They were not arguing about politics now. They were not fighting over borders. They were united by a single truth. Survival meant standing together. Messages crossed oceans, linking voices that once stood opposed. There was no time for hesitation. The Empire had underestimated them, and that mistake had to be turned into an advantage. Orders went out, not just to armies, but to ordinary citizens. The world was mobilizing, every fragment of it, but the mystery of Earth's hidden strength remained. How had the first warship been silenced? Even many humans did not know the full answer. In the shadows of research labs, projects long thought impossible were finally coming alive. Some of these efforts had been abandoned decades ago, dismissed as wild fantasies. Others had been buried for fear of their power. And yet now, with the sky burning above them, humanity reached into those forgotten corners of science and pulled out their last desperate hope. Among the scientists was an old man who had worked in obscurity his whole life. For years he had spoken of a way to use the Earth itself as a weapon, not bombs or missiles, but the very magnetic field that wrapped the planet like an invisible shield. He had been ignored, laughed at, even silenced. But when the warship died above their heads, he stood in silence, knowing his theories were no longer theories. Humanity had tapped into something ancient, something the Empire could not have imagined. It was not perfect, not stable, and not without risk. But it was real, and it had already shown its teeth. The Empire did not know this secret. All they saw was a planet daring to resist, and so they prepared to unleash their ultimate strike, a weapon that could erase whole continents in fire. Their leaders believed this would crush any remaining spirit on Earth. What they did not realize was that every second they delayed, every moment they hesitated, gave humanity more time to adapt. Already, across hidden bunkers and quiet valleys, preparations were underway for something that could change the balance of the fight. Still, fear lingered. People whispered in the dark, wondering if the next breath might be their last. The countdown of the enemy weapon echoed in their minds. It was impossible not to think of what might come next. The loss, the devastation, the silence of whole nations. Yet even as fear weighed on them, humanity refused to give in to despair. They had been underestimated before, countless times in their history, and every time they had risen. In the skies above, the Empire's weapon neared completion. The glow intensified, spreading across the surface of their flagship until it looked like a burning star. Their commanders were convinced the next strike would end Earth's defiance once and for all. But somewhere, deep beneath the soil of the planet, a pulse began to grow. It was faint at first, invisible to all but a handful of watchers. Yet it carried the weight of something vast, something alive. Earth itself seemed to be stirring, as though it had been waiting for this moment all along. The people of Earth did not yet know what was coming, only that they could not look away. They braced themselves for the impact, for the end, for whatever future awaited them in the next few heartbeats. And while the invaders believed they were seconds from victory, humanity was already reaching for its next move, one that would show the galaxy once and for all that Earth was not defenseless. The night sky trembled with light. The weapon was ready. Humanity stood on the brink. And the question that hung in the air, unspoken but powerful, was this. When the strike fell, would Earth break, or would it finally reveal the storm it had been hiding all along? The glow above Earth became unbearable, brighter than lightning, hotter than fire, a weapon so powerful it seemed to swallow the stars themselves. The people below could see it in their reflections, on rooftops, in the black glass of oceans. They knew it was meant to end them, to wipe their homes and families from existence. And yet, as the weapon charged, the world did not fall silent. Radios still buzzed with voices giving instructions. Engineers still hammered and welded, sparks leaping off metal plates. Pilots climbed into experimental craft, their hands shaking but steady. Humanity did not stop moving, because to stop would mean giving the Empire exactly what it wanted, fear without resistance. Inside the flagship of the Empire, tension boiled. Officers in silver armor moved quickly through glowing corridors, relaying the countdown. Their commanders barked orders, faces tight with frustration. The first loss of their massive warship still haunted them. They told themselves it was a malfunction, an error in design, anything but human action. But the shadow of doubt had already entered their minds. They were used to victory without question, and now their soldiers whispered of Earth with unease, as though the planet itself was fighting back. Back on Earth, people watched the sky but did not wait helplessly. In mountain ranges, hidden facilities dug deep into the rock began to pulse with strange power. Antennas rose from the ground like skeletal fingers transmitting signals no Empire machine could understand. In old factories that had been left to rust, workers returned with new purpose, reactivating machines to build devices from forgotten plans. The old man, whose theories had once been dismissed, stood at the center of it, his trembling hands guiding the younger scientists. He whispered that Earth's magnetic field was alive, that it could be bent, shaped, turned into a weapon as vast as the sky itself. No one knew if he was right, but they all wanted to believe. The conflict stretched across more than just battlefields. In cities, people argued over whether to flee or stand their ground. Trains crowded with families moving toward bunkers, streets filled with volunteers carrying supplies to the front. A mother in a small town turned her basement into a shelter for neighbors. A fisherman tied explosives to his boat, planning to take it out against an Empire landing craft. These small stories spread quickly, carried by radios and whispered from person to person. They became proof that Earth was not breaking apart under pressure. It was pulling together. Still, cracks of fear showed. Some leaders spoke privately of surrender. They argued that humanity had no fleets, no colonies, no chance of surviving against the might of the Empire. Their voices were quiet but dangerous, and others silenced them with sharp words. Surrender meant extinction, not survival. To bow before the Empire was to erase everything humanity had ever been. Even those who trembled in the dark knew that much. The Empire, for all its arrogance, was also unsettled. Their weapon was ready, but hesitation spread through their ranks. They had seen human defiance before, but never on this scale. Reports came in of strange disruptions to their communications, of warships losing control without warning. Some believed Earth had weapons hidden in its crust. Others whispered that the humans had tapped into something ancient, something the galaxy had forgotten. None of them could say for sure. But what they all knew was that their commanders' plan had already failed. Earth had not surrendered in the first minute, and that meant every passing moment was dangerous. On the ground, a group of young pilots prepared to launch. Their craft were not sleek starfighters, but experimental prototypes, cobbled together from scraps of technology and theories pulled from university labs. They looked fragile compared to the massive Empire warships, but each one carried a weapon that had never been tested in combat, devices that bent energy in ways even their creators barely understood. The pilots knew they might not return, but their eyes were steady. They carried the weight of Earth's survival with them, and in their silence there was no fear, only determination. As the countdown continued in the Empire's flagship, the tension on Earth reached a breaking point. People gathered on rooftops, in fields, by rivers, staring at the glowing weapon above. They knew the strike could fall at any second. Yet instead of despair, they found themselves waiting for the unknown. Humanity had already surprised the invaders once. Perhaps it would happen again. Perhaps the planet itself had one last secret left to reveal. Far below the surface, in the humming chambers of the Magnetic Field Project, alarms suddenly blared. The old man raised his hand for silence, his eyes shining with something between fear and triumph. He whispered that the pulse had stabilized. The Earth's own shield was ready to answer. Not perfectly, not safely, but ready. The scientists looked at one another, uncertain if unleashing such a force would save them or destroy them all. But in the end, there was no choice. Survival meant risk, and risk was something humanity had always known. Meanwhile, on the Empire's ship, a single officer paused at his station. He had seen wars before, conquests that ended with burning cities and broken worlds. But this felt different. For the first time, he wondered if the Empire had gone too far. He looked at the humans on the screens, their faces lit with determination, and felt something he could not name. Fear, perhaps, or respect. He whispered nothing, but the thought lodged itself deep in his mind. If Earth survived, the galaxy would never be the same. The weapon's glow reached its peak. Shadows stretched across continents, and the oceans turned to mirrors reflecting the fire above. Earth's people braced themselves. The pilots prepared to launch. The scientists pressed trembling hands to controls that could reshape the very air, and the invaders, so certain of victory, began to sense the ground shifting beneath them. The strike was seconds away, but already the conflict had grown larger than the Empire had imagined. This was not just about a single planet. It was about a species the galaxy had ignored, dismissed, underestimated. Humanity stood at the edge of destruction, but in that moment, they had never seemed stronger. And as the light above reached its brightest point, the question burned through every heart, human and alien alike. What would Earth do when the fire finally fell? The weapon above Earth pulsed like a living star, its glow washing the planet in waves of searing light. Oceans glittered, cities glowed like embers, and every eye turned skyward in dread. The countdown inside the Empire's flagship reached its final moments, each number echoing across their comm channels, confident and sharp. They believed this would be the end, the moment when Earth's defiance was crushed in a single instant. Yet the silence from the ground unnerved them. No cries for mercy, no pleas for surrender, only the quiet resolve of a species that refused to bow. On Earth, people clung to each other, but their fear no longer paralyzed them. Instead, it hardened into resolve. In bunkers beneath cities, families whispered promises to survive. On military bases, commanders barked orders into headsets, their voices calm but urgent. Across mountains and valleys, strange machines thrummed. With power as engineers, worked faster than they ever had in their lives. They were gambling everything on a weapon built not from might, but from desperation. A weapon drawn from Earth itself. The young pilots sat strapped into their fragile craft, their helmets reflecting the burning sky. Each of them knew the truth. Their machines were untested, their chances slim. But they also knew that if they succeeded, they could buy Earth the time it needed to strike back. Their hands trembled as they gripped the controls, yet their voices stayed steady as they exchanged. Quiet words over the comms. They did not talk of victory, only of duty, of holding the line until the last breath. The Empire's commanders stood tall in their gleaming chambers, staring at the swirling planet below. They had no doubts about the power of their weapon. It had reduced countless worlds to ash. What troubled them was the memory of the warship that had gone dark, the strange disruptions in their systems, and the stubborn refusal of humanity to break. Their pride insisted this was only resistance before the inevitable. Yet in the corners of their minds, shadows of doubt grew. If Earth had already silenced one of their ships, what else could they do? Far below, in a chamber deep under the mountains, the old man stood before the core of the magnetic field project. The air buzzed with energy, every surface vibrating with a hum that resonated in the bones. He had spent his life mocked for his theories, but now those theories were humanity's last chance. His eyes burned with both fear and triumph as he reached for the final control. He whispered that the Earth itself would answer this attack, not with fire, but with the invisible force that had shielded it for eons. Around him, the younger scientists held their breath. No one knew if it would work. No one knew if it would destroy them as well as the enemy. But the choice had already been made. The countdown struck its final number. The Empire's weapon released a scream of light, that tore through the darkness of space. The sky lit up as though dawn had broken across the entire planet at once. People shielded their eyes, yet they could not look away. It was the end, they thought. And yet, even as the fire fell, humanity acted. The pilots launched, their small craft tearing upward into the storm of energy. Their engines left trails of fire as they cut through the night, racing straight into death. The strange devices strapped to their ships came alive, bending the very energy meant to destroy them. The first wave struck like a tidal force, and their craft buckled, alarms blaring, but they held on. Sparks filled their cockpits, smoke curled around them, and still they pushed forward. Each second they lasted was another second Earth's defenses could charge, another second of hope. In the hidden bunkers, the magnetic project reached critical power. The ground shook as the Earth's magnetic field surged, a force so ancient and immense it seemed to awaken from slumber. The old man's hands trembled on the controls, sweat dripping down his face. He knew the risk. Too much power and the planet itself could fracture. But he also knew there was no other choice. His voice cracked as he gave the final order to hold steady, to trust in the storm. The Empire's officers watched the weapon's blast descend, certain nothing could survive it. But then, something unexpected happened. The beam wavered, its edges blurred. Alarms blared across their consoles as interference spiked. They shouted for answers, for stability, for control, but the data made no sense. It was as though the planet itself was pushing back, twisting the energy in ways their machines could not contain. For the first time, the commanders felt real fear. On Earth's surface, people felt the ground vibrate beneath their feet, but it was not destruction. It was power, rising through the soil, through the air, through the sky itself. The auroras danced brighter than ever before, rippling with colors no human eye had seen. The magnetic field shimmered like a shield, bending the Empire's fire around it, warping it into chaos. People raised their heads and saw the impossible, the strike. That was meant to erase them was unraveling before their eyes. Still, the danger was far from over. The weapon had not failed completely. Energy continued to pour down, burning the sky with streaks of fire. Whole forests ignited, seas boiled, and cities trembled. Humanity had not escaped, only delayed. The conflict pressed tighter, the outcome uncertain. Every system on Earth screamed under the pressure. Communications, power grids, even the magnetic shield itself. Humanity was holding but barely. In the Empire's flagship, fury consumed the commanders. They ordered more power to the weapon, demanded every reserve be poured into the strike. They could not allow a single planet to humiliate them. Their officers obeyed, but their voices shook. They had never seen resistance like this. They had never faced an enemy who met overwhelming force with something beyond understanding. The name of Earth began to spread in hushed tones among the crew, not as prey, but as a warning. The pilots still fought in the sky, their craft burning as they tore through the storm. One by one, their ships faltered, consumed by the energy, but not before they forced the weapon's fire to scatter, redirect, weaken. Each loss bought another moment for Earth's defenses. Each sacrifice carved their names into the heart of humanity's survival. Below, the old man sagged against the console, his strength nearly gone. The machines screamed as they channeled power far beyond what they were built to endure. Sparks rained down, panels exploded, and still the system held. He whispered that they were standing at the edge of something greater than survival, that if they endured this night, Earth would never again be ignored by the galaxy. But his voice was faint, and the storm threatened to consume him. The world itself seemed to hang between two breaths. Above, the Empire's weapon blazed brighter than ever. Below, Earth's defenses trembled under the strain. People prayed, shouted, cried, and held one another as the night reached its breaking point. This was the moment everything balanced. The clash of pride and defiance, of power and survival. The Empire believed they were seconds from victory. Humanity believed they were seconds from annihilation. And in that shared silence, as the sky burned and the ground shook, the story pressed toward its climax, leaving the fate of Earth hanging by a single thread, ready to snap at any moment. The night sky burned with fire, torn apart by the clash between the Empire's weapon and Earth's desperate defenses. For a moment, it seemed as if the world itself would split under the strain. Oceans boiled at their edges, cities rattled with shock waves, and still the people stood, staring upward with defiance in their eyes. The magnetic shield shimmered, bent, and screamed under the weight of energy it had never been meant to withstand. Humanity was holding on, but only just. Everyone knew it. This was not victory, only a fragile reprieve. And then something happened that no one on Earth or in the Empire had expected. The Empire's flagship, a towering fortress that had unleashed the storm, suddenly lurched. Its weapon faltered, flickered, and for a heartbeat the light vanished. Across the globe, cheers erupted, wild and desperate. People cried out that Earth had won, that the weapon was broken, that the nightmare was ending. But the celebration was short. The flagship steadied itself, and the glow returned stronger than before. Yet this time there was a difference. The energy no longer poured down in a single focused strike. It fractured, split, and rained across the planet in jagged streams of fire. The scientists underground froze at their consoles, staring in disbelief. The old man whispered hoarsely that this was worse than before. The Empire had adjusted. Instead of aiming for one decisive blow, they had spread their attack across the entire globe. No shield could block it all. The planet itself was being blanketed in destruction. Cities thousands of miles apart erupted in flames. Communication networks faltered. Satellites burst in orbit. Humanity had survived the first strike, but the second was designed not to crush in one blow, but to bleed Earth dry. In the skies above, the remaining human pilots fought to redirect the chaos. Their craft darted through streams of energy, their untested devices bending what they could. But the storm was too vast, too wild. One by one, their ships were torn apart. Flames streaked across the horizon as burning wrecks fell into the oceans and forests below. Each pilot fought to the last second, but even their sacrifices could not contain the scale of the attack. On the Empire's bridge, the commanders regained their composure. Their pride had been wounded by Earth's resistance, but now they wore cold smiles. They spoke of patience, of letting the humans exhaust themselves. This was no longer about destroying a world. This was about sending a message. They would not simply erase Earth. They would break it piece by piece until the galaxy learned what defiance cost. To them, this was justice, and they relished the thought of every second of it. On Earth, despair clawed at the edges of hope. Fires raged across continents. Families fled from cities turned to ash. Bunkers shook as if the ground itself was being pulled apart. Yet even in this chaos, humanity refused to collapse. Volunteers rushed into burning streets to pull survivors to safety. Radio stations broadcast steady voices, urging people to endure, to remember that survival itself was a victory. The very act of breathing through the fire became defiance, and that defiance grew louder with every passing second. In the underground chamber, the old man and his team worked frantically. They had pushed the magnetic shield to its limits, and now the machines sputtered on the edge of collapse. Sparks showered the room, and the younger scientists shouted for him to stop, to save what little remained. But he shook his head. His voice cracked as he told them the truth. What they had unleashed was only the beginning. The shield had not been designed to repel a storm this vast. But if they could push it further, if they could merge it with something else hidden deep in the Earth's systems, then maybe, Just maybe. They could strike back in a way the Empire would never forget, and then came the second twist. As the Empire's fractured attack spread across the globe, something stirred beneath the oceans. For years, deep-sea probes had gone missing. Strange anomalies had been recorded in the abyss. Scientists had dismissed them as errors, glitches, in the data. But now, as the planet itself shuddered, something vast awakened. At first, it was only a tremor, a ripple that shook the deep currents. But then, across the oceans, sensors lit up with readings no one could explain. The planet was not only defending itself with its field, something alive had been waiting in the depths, hidden from history, from knowledge, from memory. The military leaders were stunned as reports came in. Strange patterns in the water, massive displacements, as if continents were shifting. In one sector of the Pacific, a storm rose without warning, swallowing an entire Empire warship in minutes. The crew aboard that ship screamed across channels, before silence swallowed them whole. The commanders in orbit stared at their screens in disbelief. Earth had no fleets, no weapons, but now the planet itself was rising against them in ways they could not calculate. Whispers spread quickly among the people. Some called it coincidence, others called it nature's fury. But for many, it felt like something deeper, as if Earth itself had chosen not to die quietly. Humanity was no longer fighting alone. The planet was part of the struggle, and that realization lit a fire in their hearts stronger than any weapon. The Empire, furious and shaken, ordered every available ship to fire on the oceans, determined to silence whatever force stirred below. Beams of light pierced the waters, boiling the seas, but still the disturbances grew. Waves towered higher than skyscrapers. Lightning storms appeared where there had been none. Something vast was unfolding, something even the humans had not expected, and it terrified both sides. The old man leaned heavily against his console as reports flooded in. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with awe. He had always believed Earth had power beyond understanding. But this was proof. He whispered that the magnetic field was not just a shield. It was connected to the living world itself, to forces buried deep in the planet's bones. And if they could harness it, humanity would no longer be fighting just with machines. They would be fighting with the Earth itself. The stakes soared higher. Humanity had survived the first weapon. They had endured the second storm. But now they were standing at the edge of something far greater than survival. The Empire had come expecting a quick conquest, and instead they had awakened forces that had been waiting in silence. The galaxy had thought Earth defenseless. The Empire had thought humans were prey, but now both were beginning to realize the truth. Earth was not a victim. Earth was the storm. The burning sky and raging seas merged into one terrible, magnificent scene. Cities trembled, ships burned, and yet the spirit of humanity burned brighter than ever. Every person on the planet felt it, that this was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight to prove that humanity was not alone in the universe, not weak, not helpless. And as the Empire's weapon prepared to unleash another devastating surge, the people of Earth stood ready, their eyes fixed on the fire above and the storms below, knowing the climax was near. The galaxy would remember this night. The only question left was whether Earth would still be standing when dawn finally came. The sky was a battlefield of fire and storm, the Earth trembling beneath the weight of destruction. The Empire's weapon blazed above, pouring streams of raw energy into the atmosphere, burning cities and boiling seas. The magnetic field screamed in defiance, shimmering with auroras that danced across continents. And now the oceans themselves had risen, storms born from the deep, tearing apart ships that had once seemed untouchable. The conflict had reached its peak, the moment where survival would either be won or shattered forever. The people of Earth stood at the edge of despair and hope. In bunkers, Families clutched each other as the ground shook. In the skies, the last. Few pilots still alive twisted their burning craft through impossible maneuvers, dragging the Empire's fire away from crowded cities. In the command centers, leaders gave their final orders, their voices raw with exhaustion but steady. Every human being felt the weight of this night, and none dared look away from the blazing horizon. The Empire's commanders had grown desperate. Their pride would not allow defeat, yet their fear was growing with each passing second. They had never fought an enemy like this. No fleets, no shields, no great arsenal of starships, only stubbornness, ingenuity, and something far more dangerous. The planet itself. They demanded every reserve of power be poured into the final strike. They swore that Earth would be nothing but ashes, that no story of its defiance would survive. The weapon pulsed brighter than ever, preparing to unleash destruction on a scale never seen before. In the underground chamber, the old man stood trembling at the controls of the magnetic field project. His machines were breaking down, sparks raining from shattered panels, alarms howling in every direction. But the readings on the monitors told him what he already knew. The planet was alive in its resistance. The oceans, the storms, the very crust of the Earth was rising in defiance. His theories had never been just science. They had been a warning. Earth was not defenseless, because Earth itself was a weapon waiting to be awakened. With his final strength, he pressed the sequence that would merge the magnetic shield with the forces boiling from the depths. The ground shook violently. Across the world, people staggered as lights flickered and the air vibrated like a struck bell. The auroras above grew brighter, spreading until they wrapped the entire globe in shifting colors. Then, for one terrifying heartbeat, everything went still. The fire from the Empire's weapon froze in the air, its beams splintering against an invisible wall. The oceans stopped their raging. The wind fell silent. Even the stars seemed to pause. It was as if the world itself had inhaled. And then Earth exhaled. The magnetic field erupted outward in a wave of power that no technology could contain. It tore through the atmosphere, wrapped itself around the oceans, and surged into the sky like a living storm. The Empire's weapon, still glowing, with lethal energy, was caught in the blast. Alarms screamed through their ships as systems overloaded, engines burned out, and their mighty flagship cracked under the force. One after another, their warships flickered, their weapons failing, their shields collapsing. The fire that had threatened to consume Earth was twisted and hurled back into the sky, scattering like broken glass. From the ground, humanity watched in awe. The night sky lit with streaks of color and flame, the stars hidden behind a storm that belonged not to the Empire, but to Earth itself. People wept openly, some dropping to their knees, others shouting in triumph. For the first time, it was clear. The invincible had been broken. The Empire's pride had been crushed, not by fleets or armies, but by the will of a planet that refused to fall. The flagship convulsed as energy tore through its core. Inside, the commanders screamed orders, but nothing obeyed. Panels exploded. Corridors filled with fire and their mighty weapon. The tool that had brought hundreds of worlds to their knees collapsed under its own power. The final strike, meant to end Earth instead, tore their own vessel apart. The flagship began to fall, its enormous shadow tilting toward the planet it had tried to destroy. But then came the twist. The humans celebrated too soon. As the flagship broke apart, a secondary system activated, one no one had expected. The Empire had built fail-safes into their greatest ships, weapons designed to ensure that even in death they could take their enemies with them. Deep inside the falling hulk, a core of antimatter split open, threatening to unleash an explosion powerful enough to tear a chunk of the Earth's surface into nothingness. The old man saw it in the readings before anyone else. His voice cracked as he shouted for silence in the chamber. The Empire's weapon was finished, but if the core detonated, it would be as deadly as any strike they had unleashed. Humanity had survived the impossible, only to face destruction in victory. For a moment, the chamber was silent, every scientist staring at him with horror. And then he spoke softly, his words almost drowned by the hum of failing machines. The magnetic shield could stop the detonation, but only if it was collapsed inward, focused in a single point. And that would require all of the remaining energy, and all of the operators staying behind to control it. He did not hesitate. With shaking hands, he began to input the sequence. The younger scientists cried out, begged him to stop, but he smiled faintly. He had lived his life in obscurity, dismissed, forgotten. Now, in this final act, he would prove not only his theories, but his faith in humanity itself. His voice carried across the comms as he told the leaders of Earth to hold fast, to be ready for what came next. Above, the wreck of the flagship fell closer, glowing brighter as the core reached critical. The sky itself seemed to burn. People clutched one another, unable to breathe, their eyes wide with terror. And then, as the explosion built to its peak, the auroras flared one last time. The magnetic shield collapsed inward, a wall of light, focusing on the falling core. The impact came not with fire, but with silence, an impossible silence as the core imploded into itself, swallowed by the shield before it could ignite. The flagship shattered in orbit, raining harmless debris into the upper atmosphere. Earth shook, the oceans roared, and then, finally, the night grew quiet. Humanity had survived. The Empire's weapon was gone, their fleet broken, their pride in ruins. On the ground, cheers erupted, filling the air with sound that echoed across the world. People wept, shouted, and embraced one another, knowing they had lived through the impossible. The Empire had come to destroy them in minutes, and instead, it was the Empire that had been shattered. But the final twist lingered in silence. The old man was gone, his sacrifice buried with the machines that had saved the world. And deep in the oceans, the strange forces that had awakened did not return to sleep. Humanity had survived the night, but something vast had stirred, something ancient and powerful that had risen in their defense. Whether it was ally or threat, no one could say. As dawn broke over the battered planet, the people of Earth looked to the sky, their eyes filled with fire. They had been underestimated, dismissed, nearly erased, and yet they stood. The galaxy would never again think of them as prey. But the yada question whispered in every heart remained. Had Earth truly won, or had it only awakened a storm greater than any empire? The first rays of dawn stretched across the battered world, soft light falling on smoke-filled skies and seas still trembling from the night's fury. Earth was scarred but still alive. The weapon that had been meant to erase it had failed. The mighty fleet of the Empire, once thought invincible, was scattered and broken, its flagship reduced to drifting wreckage in orbit. Humanity, though exhausted and bloodied, had endured. What was supposed to be their last night had become their first true victory. All across the planet, people emerged from bunkers, shelters, and ruins. They looked up at the sky, half expecting more fire to fall, but saw only fragments of metal, burning as they entered the atmosphere. Children clutched their parents, staring wide-eyed at the glowing trails overhead, not yet understanding that they were witnessing the remains of the invaders. Crowds filled city squares, not to surrender, but to celebrate survival. Radios crackled with voices trembling with joy, passing the news that humanity had done the impossible. Earth had stood against the Empire and remained unbroken. In the mountains, the chamber where the magnetic field project had been run lay in ruins. Broken machines smoked, wires sparked, and consoles were blackened. Among the debris, the young scientists stood in silence, their faces pale and eyes wet. They had watched the old man give his life to save the world, his theories vindicated in the most powerful way possible. He had not lived to see the dawn, but his sacrifice had ensured it. They promised themselves his name and his work would never be forgotten. Humanity would not only rebuild, it would carry his vision forward. The last surviving pilots limped back to Earth, their craft cracked and smoking from battle. They stepped from their cockpits to cheers from the survivors, though their eyes carried the weight of those who had not returned. Each one knew that their comrades' sacrifices had bought the precious seconds needed for victory. In their silence, they carried the memory of the fallen, knowing history would remember them not as forgotten fighters, but as heroes who had flown into the storm with nothing but courage and untested machines. World leaders, once divided, now spoke as one. In emergency broadcasts carried across every channel, they declared not only survival, but unity. There had been no single nation that saved the planet. It had been everyone. Farmers who gave their fuel, miners who dug shelters, children who carried supplies, scientists who defied reason, and soldiers who refused to break. Humanity had faced extinction not as fractured peoples, but as one world, and from that day on, they swore, Earth would never again allow division to weaken it. But in the celebration, questions lingered. The oceans had risen with storms no human had commanded. Something deep beneath the surface had stirred, answering the threat with a power no one understood. Some believed it was merely nature, reacting to the immense forces unleashed by the battle. Others whispered of something older, something alive that had always waited in the shadows of the planet. Reports of unusual readings continued to flow in, strange movements beneath the waters and in the crust of the earth itself. Humanity had won the night, but they had also awakened mysteries they were not prepared to face. In the Empire's surviving ships, silence reigned. Their once proud commanders sat stunned, their arrogance shattered. They had expected an easy conquest, a lesson to the galaxy of their unstoppable might. Instead, they had been humiliated. Many of their vessels limped into retreat, unwilling to remain in orbit above a planet that had proven far more dangerous than they had imagined. For the first time in generations, the Empire felt fear, not from another galactic power, but from a single world they had dismissed as weak. The message spread quickly through the stars. Traders, smugglers, and spies carried word of the impossible. Earth had defeated the Empire's weapon. Earth had stood against overwhelming force. Earth had endured. Worlds long held under the Empire's control listened closely. If humanity could defy them, perhaps others could as well. Rebellion, once a whisper, began to stir louder across the galaxy. The story of Earth's defiance was no longer just humanity's victory. It was a spark for countless others. On Earth, survivors began the work of rebuilding. Cities had been burned, forests scorched, oceans scarred. But humanity had always been a species of builders. They cleared rubble, raised new shelters, and began to heal their wounded planet. Engineers salvaged debris from fallen Empire ships, their eyes wide at the technology now within their grasp. The same ingenuity that had saved them in battle now turned toward the future. If the Empire returned, humanity would not wait unprepared. They would rise stronger, faster, and armed with the very tools of their former enemies. The reflection of victory was bittersweet. Families mourned the countless lives lost in the attack, their grief mingling with pride that their loved ones had stood in defense of Earth. The pilots who had fallen in the skies, the civilians who had given everything to protect their neighbors, the old man who had sacrificed himself at the heart of the magnetic field, each story became part of a greater whole. Humanity promised to carry them forward, their names etched into memory as the ones who proved Earth was never defenseless. As days passed, the auroras still glowed faintly in the skies, lingering longer than they should have, a reminder of the storm that had saved the planet. People looked at them with reverence, some calling them the planet's gift, others calling them a warning. Humanity had tapped into forces far beyond their understanding. They had survived the Empire, but the universe had grown larger and stranger in the process. In the quiet after the battle, a single truth echoed across every mind. Earth was no longer hidden. The galaxy now knew that this small blue planet was not prey. It was a force to be reckoned with, a world of survivors who would fight even when the odds were impossible. Humanity had written its place among the stars, not with fleets or colonies, but with sheer refusal to surrender. The final twist lingered in the silence of the deep. The storms that had risen from the oceans did not fade completely. In certain places, the waters still churned unnaturally as if something vast watched from below. Humanity did not yet understand what they had awakened, but they knew this: they were no longer alone. Their greatest victory had also opened a door, and beyond that door, mysteries waited that could either protect or destroy them. As the sun rose higher, warming the battered earth, people began to dream again. They dreamed not only of survival, but of exploration, of reaching out into the stars to see what else awaited them. The Empire had come to enslave them, but in doing so, it had given them a gift: the knowledge that they were far stronger than they had ever believed. Humanity was no longer bound by fear of the unknown. Earth had survived the night. The Empire had been humbled. The galaxy had been warned, and in the hearts of humanity burned a promise that no matter what storm came next, no matter what ancient force stirred beneath their oceans, or what enemies arrived from the stars, they would stand together. Because the Empire had thought Earth was defenseless, but they had learned too late that humanity was the storm. And as the world turned beneath the light of a new day, one truth became certain: the galaxy would never be the same again.